Good evening, everyone. We have Stotra Chakrabarti, who has done his MSc from Wildlife Institute of India, and then he joined as a senior researcher from Wildlife Institute of India. And currently, he is doing his postdoc from University of Minnesota, and is working on gay lion behavior and also in wolves. So, welcome, Stotra. Yeah.
Right, thanks. Right. So good evening, everyone. It's morning out here, so good morning as well. And yeah, I'll keep my. So thanks for the introduction and thank you for having me on this webinar series. And I will talk about what kind of things that I do, like on field and stuff later. So I'll cut to the chase. We'll talk about what's pertinent at the moment. So the United Nations, about 5 years ago, came up with a booklet, came up with a report which talked about what are the major challenges to our well-being, to human well-being on this planet. And poverty, lack of basic education and health facilities, and terrorism ranked absolutely on the top of the major challenges that humans face across the globe. These are the major impediments to our species' well-being. Well, I'm not talking just about humans today, so just bear with me. So I'll move on to what are the major challenges for biodiversity conservation in the globe. And we all know what's happening in Brazil. We all know what's happening in Borneo. We all know what's happening all across the globe. We know that the Brazilian rainforest is being cleared for livestock grazing. The rainforests in Borneo are being cleared for palm oil plantation. And this is just a trend. It's happening all over the globe. Forests are being opened up for coal mines or mining problems. And what is happening is a very pertinent picture like this on the top right corner, where we have animals which undergo a lot of space reduction because we are encroaching on their space because human resource, we need a lot of resource. That reduces their space, that reduces their food, and that makes them come out or be out and about in human spaces. And that's why pictures like this, elephants in tea estates, elephants in coffee estates, or animals in human neighborhoods are becoming more and more pertinent or more and more persistent. The other thing that comes with human development is our roads, linear infrastructure, and such linear infrastructure, roads, railways, and canals break up population. This is a picture from Gir, where you can see a group of Asiatic lions. This was a monitored pride during my PhD days. They are because this is a busy state highway, and it cuts up the forest patches between half, and these animals are just waiting for traffic to go down so that they can cross. So what happens with these indirect effects are that populations are hit, populations can take the brunt, but what happens directly in sort of as a major challenge for biodiversity conservation is direct killing of animals, which comes with retaliation, because these animals like the things that we do. They come and eat either our property or us, or they do a lot of damage to our things. That's why people retaliate, they kill, or these animals are poached for body parts. We all know what happened to the elephant population across the globe. 70% of the African elephant population, the range declined because of ivory trade. We all know about that. Tigers dwindled because of poaching for their body parts. So these are the major problems for biodiversity conservation across the globe, which reduces populations as well as it takes a direct effect, which reduces individuals as well. Now, I just talked about the major challenges of human welfare or our welfare, and I talked about the major challenges of conserving wildlife in the globe. When I mix them two together, what comes is another major challenge for human well-being. And it has been recognized by the United Nations very recently, and that is sharing space with deadly, dangerous animals is becoming a more reality every day. And that is a major problem because it's not easy to share space with these deadly animals. I'm sure everyone across the globe, or at least people who are watching, know what's happening out there on the left of the screen. You have an elephant in a paddy field. It's very, very pertinent. It's very regular in places like southern India or northern part of Bengal, from where I come from. Down there, if you see a picture of an old person bathing another person who doesn't have hands, this is a case of lion. This is a case of this guy was actually mauled by a lion in Africa. I don't know whether anybody knows about this picture where this person is battling a leopard. I'm sure this has come across. This has come across in media a lot. We were fortunate enough to be taught by this person, Dr. Sanjay Gubbi, and if you come to the right end, the bottom right of the slide, there is a picture of a group of Asiatic lions feeding on a livestock they have killed. And so what all of these pictures portray is that the animals and us are at complete loggerheads with each other. They come and they find our property and us to be irresistible, and that's what causes a major challenge of living with these dangerous animals. Well, I live in North America now, and I have been studying wolves for a while. And there has been this huge hoo-ha about from people that they just love to hate the wolf or hate to love it. Like the Wildlife Protection Act in India, in North America, or in the United States of America, there is an endangered species list. And the wolf gets to the endangered species list or gets delisted because people just love to hate it, or they love it, but not in their backyard. So I raised the question that whether the wolf is a saint or a sinner or both. And I went back and looked at records that what's causing this bad name about the big bad wolf? Why is wolf such a conflict species in North America? And I looked at how many human fatalities or injuries have happened in the last 50 years. Any guesses what could be that this has made the wolf the major challenge of living in North America? This is the big bad wolf that literature talks about, movies talk about. How many fatalities, how many injuries this particular carnivore has caused in the last 50 years? None. Not a single human fatality or injury that this animal has caused in the last 50 years in North America. So what's this huge ruckus about? Now, if I turn my attention to India, I'll just give you a few facts and figures. These are government facts and figures. If you look at between 2013 and 2017, 113 people were killed by tigers, reportedly killed by tigers. Between the same time, there were more than 1,200 people that were killed by elephants in India. And trust me, given the precedence of, given the large state of our country, so many people, it is pretty prudent to say that for every 4 deaths or 5 deaths, only 1 gets reported. So this is a hugely conservative estimate of what's happening in India. But even that, if you see that we live with such great danger to human life, yet we have tigers killing people, we have elephants killing people, and of course we kill tigers, we kill elephants. And why so? So we have a major dichotomy, we have a major contradiction when it comes to North America, where wolves are a major problem, but they have not killed any people or caused any injury in the last 50 years. And these are just 3-year figures from India. And I want to deliberate why. Well, the first thing is human density in India is about 10 times more than the United States of America in average. And we have optimistic scenarios, like we have the 70% of the global tiger population in India, and it's growing. we have about 27,000 Asian elephants in India, and the population is growing. We all know what it is like. This picture is from the highest density of leopards found in one of the most densely populated cities of the world, Mumbai. And with all that, that's 5% of living organisms of the planet in 2% of the world's landmass. And among these 5%, I'm talking about the most deadly, most dangerous, the biggest, and the most phenomenally strong animals in the world. With that, they live with 1.3 billion people. And that is just sit back and think what we live with and how these animals live with people. And that's what basically my talk is about today. I would just like to raise a couple of questions with this entire process. So this was on the left of the panel, that was 1992. This is a nightlight picture of India in 1992, and this is present. So India shines bright. What's happening is urban development has taken over that entire country. But of course, it shines bright in the night, but whether it shines bright for wildlife is a big question, because these are all human settlements have increased, electricity have reached, and what you're seeing is that forest patches are disappearing slowly. And what happens then is situations like these. You have large, dangerous animals at the matrix of human use. And these pertinent pictures on the left, on the top left, are becoming an increasing regularity in people's lives. So what has happened with this space crunch? Because people have expanded and forest resources where most of our wildlife is have reduced. Average protected area size in India is just about 200 square kilometers. And if you talk about space issues or space dichotomy, the major national parks or forest areas in the West or in Africa, Yellowstone, 9,000 square kilometers. Serengeti, more than 14,000 square kilometers of protected forest. Kruger, more than 20,000 square kilometers. India doesn't have the leverage or the luxury of having such big parks or such big pristine wilderness. If you look at the left, the bottom left, this is a map from the 2nd century BC. This is the elephant distribution as given in Arthashastra. If you see, there are a lot of big elephant populations across the globe. And this, to the right, is a map from the recent tiger estimation, where they also enumerated elephant populations across the country. And if you see the elephant population is basically in yellow. They have been broken down and disjunct all over. They remain as tiny pockets across the country because forest patches have reduced. Elephants do not have a lot of space, and that's why the populations have taken a huge brunt. But if you look at the left, there were considerable populations across the country in the 2nd century BC. What's interesting to me in this map is that there was a huge population of elephants in Rajasthan and Gujarat, where there are no elephants right now. I'll come to this, or maybe I'll pose this as a question right now. Somebody may answer that what happened to the elephant population there. It's pretty interesting to think about these in a desert or in a very arid system, how elephants survived and what happened to these populations. Moving on, thus sharing space is not easy. These are some curious pictures. I'm sure everyone knows what's happening all across the country. If you look at the top right, that's a tiger crossing. The main highway at about 11 in the morning. I was coming back from a drive in the Ranthambore forest, and coming out, this is the major thoroughfare. This is a major highway outside the park, and there is a tiger just crossing it at 11 in the morning. The lions out here, they're just paying their homage to temples at 6 or 6:30 in the morning, and trust me, just after half hour, this temple was busy, thronging with people. What I'm trying to say is that people and these dangerous carnivores or elephants or ungulates live at very close proximity. And this enigma that we call as coexistence is pretty interesting in a densely populated country like India. And that is what I'm going to talk about and move you through that why this enigmatic coexistence might have come into feature. And one of the major reasons that everyone talks about, and that is particularly true, is the cultural reverence and tolerance that India or Indian people or Indian philosophy has for all life forms. If you look at this, this is just an assorted array of pictures that actually shows that how Indian wildlife have been incorporated into an entire array of worship and religious tolerance across the country. All of them define or project certain animals, and that's why most of these animals have been conserved, because people really have a very strong affection and affiliation to these animals in sort of through a religious conduit. And often people talk about protected forests, and the first protected area was established in India around 400 BC. That's the time. That's how far Indian wildlife conservation goes, or Indian wildlife conservation ethos goes back in time. Among all these deities and among all these very religious figures, one particular figure has become a very strong statement across the country and different places. That's the Narasimha, or which is basically the lion personification of God, or the Vishnu avatar of lion. And I'll be mostly talking about that avatar in my presentation. So I'm sure, I hope people know about something about the Asiatic lion, because the census reports were recently up on the news. The Prime Minister tweeted about a hike in numbers. So there are about 600 odd individuals. The official census report is about 674 individuals living as a single relic population. This is the global population that lives in one protected forest in Northwest India. It had an extensive distribution in the 19th century. If you look at that extensive distribution, it's basically from Persia to Palamo in Bihar. So there were lions all across the northern part of India, but which dwindled at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, and they got confined into this small little patch of forest in Gujarat, which is the Gir forest. And that was primarily caused by hunting and habitat loss. So it's now found only in the Gir forest and the adjoining landscape of about 13,000 to 20,000 square kilometers. The green part is the protected forest, but lions are present outside the protected forest in a human-dominated matrix as well. The population right now that you see, about 674 individuals, they came from a very low founding population of about 50 odd animals. And so this population is severely inbred, and it grew into a large population, but it provides a hugely successful conservation story where the range and the number of this particular species has increased with protection and care. Well, for understanding the ecology or understanding conservation needs of any particular species, first and the foremost thing that we need is to understand their numbers, right? And does anybody know how populations are enumerated? I'm sure, because there is a lot of extensive population research in our country, primarily focused and primarily led by the tiger estimation that's done scientifically and beautifully across the country. When we talk about population estimation, trust me, a unique identification helps, because tigers are known from their stripes, leopards are known from the spots. But when it comes to lions, they're all very tawny brown. They're very monomorphic in their skin color. So what to do when it comes to lion identification? It doesn't, skin color doesn't help. Lions are known from their mustache pattern, which is interesting, which is an interesting development, which was developed in Africa, and later on in the Asiatic system, it was it was changed, renewed, and redefined in a different way. And since then, we have been using this technique, using whisker profiles or mustache pattern profiles on the left and right, and we collect photographs of both sides, along with different other features like permanent body marks and scars. And we have a particular software, we have a particular Visual Basic software to fingerprint lions called the Lion Sighting Base. We can put all these pictures, and we can all put all these pictures and information into this software, along with information of what was the group size, because lions live in groups, the description of their habitat, and different other features. And what we can come up with is a population estimation of their numbers. And what we have understood throughout a long-term study, by collecting a lot of information on different individual lions across time frame, that within the protected forest, that is about 1,400 square kilometers, that's the only extent that is protected as a national park and a sanctuary, lions live in a high density of about 15 per 100 square kilometers. Whereas outside the protected forest, in a human-dominated landscape, lions live at lower densities of about 2 lions per 100 square kilometers. But that's also quite a bit, because humans live at quite high densities outside. So there is a huge interface, human-lion interface, in the entire range of Asiatic lions. Well, the fun part begins of not only just knowing about their population, but also where these lions range, because how these lions move in the landscape dictates how frequently they come into contact with human beings. And for that, what I enjoyed the most is radio telemetry. We catch lions, we put them with a nice necklace which bears a transmitter, and we can follow them on foot or on vehicles, and we collect VHF signals, we collect GPS signals from these radio collars, and we exactly know where these lions have been moving and how frequently they move, and so on and so forth. We used about 31 radio collared individuals, as well as 83 lions that were monitored across a very long time frame. This Asiatic lion project is ongoing for about 25, 28 years now. And what we understood from this particular study, from the long-term information, is that inside the protected forest, male lions range about 120 square kilometers in an area, in a territory of about 120 square kilometers, whereas females, groups of females, they live within a range or territory size of about 60 square kilometers. But as soon as you move outside the protected forest, in a human-dominated landscape, these lions range crazily more. Males can go up to about 300 square kilometers, and groups of females can be about double the size than what they range inside the protected forest. Okay. And of course, the first question comes is why? What happens to the lions outside the protected forest? And this is what happens outside. If you look at the outside matrix, so if you look at these small little patches that I have highlighted in yellow, these are patches of forest, or basically Prosopis and other forest patches. These are small, tiny patches of forest in a human-dominated matrix. So these patches of forest are like raisins in a plum cake of human habitation, because everything in between are human fields, like agricultural fields and human habitation. So if a lion needs to move from one patch to another where these lions are resting in the day, they have to travel a lot. And that's why these lions range so wide, they are so wide ranging, and that brings them into direct interface with humans. We also found that with this radio telemetry information, our long-term project found that lions or breeding lionesses need at least 4 square kilometers of sacrosanct patches that I showed to give birth and rear their cubs and safeguard them for a while. So such patches are absolutely necessary to be conserved in the larger landscape where humans and lions live close by. Well, so we know that lions move across bringing lions and humans at an interface. But that's not the major conflict, right? Because we are talking about conflict in the case where lions pose a threat to human life, lions pose a threat to human property. And we know that lions are carnivores. They like to feed on ungulates, and we wanted to know how and what these lions are feeding on, because that gives us an idea how much conflict or how much potential conflict is out there in the system. And of course, we had a peek in the poop because carnivores, carnivore diet studies are primarily done from their scats or their feces. We collected feces all across the landscape, not only from inside the protected forest, but also from outside. And what we found was that inside the protected forest, lions are primarily feeding on wild ungulates like cheetal. The major ungulate that they feed on are cheetal and sambar. So they are mostly feeding on wild ungulates inside the protected forest. But as soon as you move outside, lions are mostly feeding on domestic livestock, domestic buffalo and cattle. So when you see this graph, it shows that lions are basically causing a huge lot of conflict in the area where outside the protected forest. But since we were following lions on a daily basis, day in and day out through radio telemetry, we found that 65% of all the biomass consumed from livestock that comes from actually scavenging and not actual predation of domestic livestock. And the question comes that how on earth do lions get so much of scavenging events? Why are there so many dead, dying livestock all across Gujarat? And that is because it's mostly a non-beefitarian state, and cattle is considered very high on the religious scale, on the Hindu entire religious scale, and what happens is, so livestock, domestic livestock is not used beyond a particular period, because livestock has, or cattle has, a particular milk period or where they can produce milk, and after that they have no use. They're left open. They throng the marketplaces. They live across the landscape, and also they're put into cattle camps or goshalas, which are charity camps where dying or old livestock or old cattle is taken care of, and these animals die in hundreds across the landscape, and they're just dumped outside, and lions get a free buffet. And that's what is the crux of human-lion coexistence in this entire landscape, because lions are primarily feeding on what is already spent. They're not feeding or killing productive livestock. They're mostly feeding on dead, dying, unproductive livestock. And that doesn't hit the pocket so much as it would have if they were actually feeding on domestic, productive livestock. Moving on, of course, to understand the entire interface of lions and humans, I gave you a proxy of understanding human and lion coexistence or interactions through what they can bring, what change or what effect they can bring on our property. Let's see what happens to direct interactions with lions. I don't know if anybody knows about the community Maldharis. So they are like the famed Maasais in Africa that live in Eastern Africa. The Maldharis are pastoralists. They live inside the protected forest. They live with lions, and they have been living for generations, and their major occupation is dairy farming. And a research from the long-term study found that the forest-dwelling Maldharis, the Maldharis who live inside the forest, because they have rights to fodder, they have grazing rights, because since they live within the protected forest, they live within the forest along with lions, they have rights to the pastures, to the forest produce and fodder. For that, they make 58% more profit than the Maldharis who have to live outside the forest without lions, because for them, the pastures, the graze and stall feeding, everything has a price, because they have to feed livestock. Whereas inside the protected forest, where these people live with the lions, they get them for free. But that's a huge profit margin. But as soon as you add a compensation scheme that is quick and fair from the forest department, where the forest department monetarily compensates for every livestock killed by lions, that profit margin of people living inside with lions augments to about 78%. So basically, people who live inside the forest along with lions make more money just by living with lions than people who don't live with lions. So there is a huge win-win scenario in this case, where the economic incentives of living with lions are very high than not living with them. So filled coffers basically foster a lot of goodwill for lions. But that's the story that we know of. We also looked at how conflict is happening, or how reported conflict is happening across the landscape. And if you look at the graph, these are lion and leopard conflict maps across the landscape. The green part is the protected forest, and these bubbles are basically where conflict has happened across the landscape. And what's happening is that if you see, there is a lot of conflict outside the protected forest. These are basically reported. These are basically compensation claims to the forest department, where lions kill livestock and people go and ask for compensation. So we mapped all these across a 5-year period, and you can see that there are conflict hotspots which are close to the protected forest, because lions are moving outside and also eating productive livestock. They're not just refraining to unproductive livestock, because lion population is increasing. They are also feeding on productive livestock, and that's why these conflict scenarios are getting higher with every single day or every passing moment. So if you look at, these are the conflict hotspot contours for lions, and these are the conflict hotspots for leopards. And if I put them together, there's just a 25% overlap. So where the lions are, the leopards avoid. So basically, you have conflict in this landscape from two major carnivores, lions and leopards, and they mostly do not, they cause conflict in about, which they share about 25%, but most of the time they do it separately and disjunctly, and that might cause more conflict, because somewhere lions are causing conflict and some other places leopards are. So both together, two species in conflict, that makes it more difficult to consider, more difficult to hold on to and mitigate. We also looked at a temporal extent of how conflict is increasing across the landscape. What's happening is that every year, there is 105 new villages that are being added to the list where lions are killing livestock. So what's happening is basically the lion population is increasing in its range across the entire landscape. And with every year, 100 new villages are added to the list where lions go and kill livestock. So of course, and most of these villages, people didn't have any association or any idea of living with lions. Lions are present in areas where they were not there for the last 200 years. So people do not have any living history of living with these carnivores. So that is a major problem that we have at the moment, that people actually do not know how to live with these carnivores because they were not present for the last century or more. So and this might be a ticking time bomb, because it's a double-edged sword. It's working at the moment, but we do not know what's going to happen with this rate of increase in conflict. We have no idea where this very precarious and very precious coexistence stands. The balance can tip off in any way, and if it tips off towards the way where lions get the battering, or lions completely get retaliated against, well, I will not be very surprised, because these are places where people actually do not know or have any living memory of living with this charismatic carnivore. But what's interesting is that if you look at actual attacks on humans, that's not a lot. If you look at leopards cause more lethal incidents, in the last 7 years, there has been only 8 fatalities by lions. What's also interesting is that since we have been following lions through radio telemetry, and we've been following them day and night, and they come into interactions with humans, we found that 1 in every 10,000 encounters between lions and humans actually resulted in an attack. So although there is a huge potential interface between lions and humans, the actual conflict is pretty low. So that's one of the crux of lion conservation in the landscape, that it's still under socially acceptable limits. But till when is the question. We also looked at what's the reasons of liking or disliking lions to live in the neighborhood. And what we found was that people mostly dislike lions because of economic laws, because they cause a loss of property and threat to human life. But what was interesting is that mostly people like to live with lions in this landscape. And you know why? And that is where the entire bridge with this entire webinar series comes into picture, because I've been told that ecotourism is one of the major crux or major linkage of this particular webinar series. And basically, people like to live with lions. If you look at here, the major red bar is because of economic reasons. And what are the economic reasons of having lions in your backyard? Is basically this. Major tourism across the landscape is affected because of lions. This is the only place, people, where you find Asiatic lions in the world. People come here to see, people come here to watch these animals, and you have the resorts, hoteliers, the entire gypsy vehicles, and people, guides and foresters, and everyone who are associated with this tourism industry get a huge economic benefit out of having lions around. Also, lions act as major crop pests, because nilgai and wild pigs are major problems for farmers in this landscape. And if you have lions in and around your farm, the problem of such crop damaging ungulates reduced dramatically. So farmers are pretty happy with having lions around. And of course, normal people, because tourism gets a huge boost. What's interesting is that most the people who do not like lions are the pastoralists, because of course they have livestock to take care of, and lions kill livestock. But if you look at agriculturalists, agropastoralists, and others, mostly people like to live with lions. So basically, still now, it's a very love relationship with lions in this landscape, and primarily it is because of religious tolerance, non-vegetarianism, and of course the economic boost that lions provide through tourism in this entire process. And that's what's keeping the major this population together across the landscape. But till when is a question, because lions are causing problems for human property, and not so much for life, but of course human property. And the other thing is that, so if you look at in the entire landscape where lions are in the Gujarat landscape, there are about 300 wildlife trackers that track lions day in and day out. They are subsisted by the forest department, and there are 400 Vanyaprani Mitras. They are the friends of wildlife. They are given a remuneration from forest department to keep track of lions. But that's a huge employment generation just from lions. So this is where lions come up into the tourism industry, or in the entire industry of economic industry, where lions provide employment opportunities to people, to a lot of families. And this is why, if you go and talk to people in this area, people who have basically sustain their entire livelihood on lions. Well, so lions act as a major economic source for people in this state. Well, so that was lions living in this landscape, lions living with humans, and humans living with lions, and that's the major crux of coexistence. But I'll come back to the major biodiversity challenges again. And as I said, that we have space crunch across the country, and a report by Professor Jala and his team in 2007, they found out that you need about 20 breeding females of tigers. He looked at tigers at that time, 20 breeding females of tigers to actually have a feasible population that can live on for about 100 years or so, or a biologically and evolutionarily feasible population. You need at least about 20 breeding females, which can take a little bit of poaching as well. But so each female needs about 30-40 square kilometers of forest, and 20 breeding females is about 800 square kilometers. Now I'll tether back to my previous note where I talked about that average protected area is about 240 square kilometers. So we cannot have, in one protected forest, we cannot have 20 breeding units of tigers or 20 breeding units of lions per se, because they need space. So what the major conservation paradigm in India has moved on to is a metapopulation framework where you have these big forest patches which are connected by corridors. This is the central India landscape of tigers, and you have Melghat, Satpura, Pench, Kana, Bandhavgarh, Sanjay, Dubri, and these are all connected with forest patches. So together they form a larger landscape where you can hold more than 20 breeding females, and they can move in throughout. And that's why these crucial corridors, which are basically in pink, are very important for animals to move across. But this entire landscape, not only in the central Indian landscape, but all across the country, is fast changing from open grasslands or open forests or to agricultural fields and builds up. And what's happening is, if you look at the same landscape again, this is the number of roads that are there. A tiger moving from any of these protected forests, which are the source population in red, have to come across all these major thoroughfares and human movement, and that cuts up population. And I'm bringing the same concept of how I was talking about inhibition of movement can cause population declines, and this is exactly why. Because again, these small little patches of forest become like islands, because animals cannot move in between, and they might just vanish in the near future. And that is exactly what is also happening for lions. The Lion King, I'm sure everyone has watched this movie, and this is what is going to happen if we let, of course, infrastructure and human resource development is necessary, but at what cost? We need to have some sort of delineation of where these corridors can be saved. If you look at, this is the landscape of lions, and this is from a recent paper of ours, and these blue lines, these are the major corridors of lions across the landscape, where the green patches are the patches of lion populations outside the protected forest. The Gir protected forest is here, marked in red. And if you look at these blue lines, these are the places, or these are the conduits or the safe passages or thoroughfares of lions, how they move in the landscape. And we collected that information through radio telemetry and following lions. And if you see, they are mostly cut up by either railways, or these brown lines are basically major state and national highways. So most of the corridors are being cut up or broken because of human resource development on infrastructure facilities. Of course, infrastructure and resource development is important, but we need to prioritize certain areas over others. We might need to move or have safe passages like overpasses or underpasses, so that lions actually can move through these landscapes, or any wildlife can move through the landscape across the country. The other problem is that there has been a huge hue and cry, because this is the only population of Asiatic lions, and we all know that having all the eggs in the same basket can be a huge problem. And an earthquake or an epidemic or anything can wipe out the population. And the solution being, there was a population viability meeting way back in 1993. I was 3 years old at that time, of course. And that is the time when they figured that there is a second population needs to be established. And for that, Kuno Wildlife Sanctuary was identified. It's about 800 kilometers away, and Kuno was readied for lions to move in. People were moved out, villages were moved out, a huge prey restocking happened, prey populations increased in Kuno, and 1,300 square kilometers was ready for lions to come in. And the Supreme Court, I think it's one of the major win. The judgment is a major win for wildlife conservation in India. And 15th of March directed that the center to shift Asiatic lions from Gujarat to Kuno with an immediate effect within 6 months. And if you look at that entire judgment, it says that we should take a more eco-centric approach rather than an anthropocentric approach. And that, coming from the highest court of law, is a win in an itself. But what happened next? That was 15th of March 2013. 15th of March 2020 has already been passed. None of the lions have moved. There's a political deadlock. And so basically, people in Gujarat very strongly feel for lions, and there is sort of a deadlock in that scenario, and none of the lions have moved from Gir to Madhya Pradesh, and that's where we stand at the moment. Given this scenario, we have a court order, but we still cannot move lions. We now have a new court order. Same Supreme Court has given that the Asiatic cheetah that was last recorded in India in 1948 in a place very close to Satyamangalam. And Subish, who is a part of the panel, I have been fortunate to trek that place with Subish during our master's time. It's a beautiful place. I think it's the cheetah that got extinct, the Asiatic cheetah in India got extinct in around 1948. Now we have a court order where we are wildlife biologists and people can bring in cheetahs, I think, from Africa. And I would love to see the cheetah, it might be a great flag bearer for grassland conservation across the country. But what I'm trying to say is that we do have these kinds of conundrums, these kinds of contradictions. We have a court order of moving lions from one place to another. It didn't happen. Now we have a new court order of bringing an absolutely extinct species together. So what I'm trying to say is that conservation in India is a conundrum of odds. There's so many people that their rights and voices does take precedence, and conservation remains as the best bargain we can hit given a certain set of circumstances, and that set of circumstances keep changing over the years. And I believe that it is the economic benefit that people get, economic and ethical and moral benefits that people get from wildlife, like tourism, ecotourism, feeling of owningness, that might lead the path for wildlife conservation in India, because wildlife is just not restricted to protected forests anymore in the country. They live with us. They live in cities and in human landscapes. So I'll just quickly. So that was the technical part of it. Do we have time for a few more pictures? I'm not going to talk much.
We have time. Please go ahead.
Sure. So I'll just share a couple of fun times that I had while studying lions for my PhD in Gir. So this is a group of Asiatic lions, but mostly males do not live with females. This is a time when there was a big sambar carcass, and so the males are feeding on. You have 2 lionesses sleeping. The cubs are coming out of the bushes. I'm sitting here. These are an absolutely relaxed scene. This particular lioness just joined in. She was pregnant. She gave birth about 2 weeks after this incident.
Oh.
I have no clue why she did that, but that was very amusing to me. Like, she just came in, it's like it made me feel that, yeah, enough of lazing around, just start roaring. Anyway, so that was that. Well, I studied the mating strategies of lions, and I think this particular picture summarizes my PhD pretty strongly. They're very benevolent and very, very gentle when it comes to their courting and mating period. but they are, of course, they can be quite aggressive as well. So these are some pictures and some fun times that I had. As I said, that in Yellowstone and in North America, there are wolf jams and bear jams when wolves and bears come on the streets and people just throng the streets and cars with a huge line of traffic to see wolves and lions. We have lion jams in Gujarat. This is a monitored pride, and basically the collared lioness have gone into the thickets. These are Prosopis thickets, and these are Acacia nilotica and Prosopis, and these are the two juveniles of hers. And there is a speeding truck coming. It's been monsoon, and this is reality at the moment. This is what I have been talking about right at the time, that you have linear infrastructure and state highways cutting lion populations or patches into disjunct systems. Of course, I talked about this before, but it was great to see how lions and humans live in close proximity. This particular lioness is basically radiocolored. It's her cub, and there are other groups in the thickets, other individuals of the groups as well in the thickets. But it's a very pretty relaxed scene. And half an hour later, there were the village priest and people came here to have offerings. And I'm like, yeah. And when I talk to them, they're like, yeah, okay, that happens every day. I'm like, okay, that's okay, fine. Of course, lions as carnivores, being on a hunt, that's the most fantastic moments that I have had seeing lions, because the rest of the times they're okay, but when they hunt as carnivores, they're just supremely amazing to watch. And I had gotten pretty close and intimate with these animals in the form of observations, and it was great to observe them while on a hunt. And of course, I do not end my presentation without showing pictures of cubs, because that's what brings the TRP back. Because of course, cubs are cute, and most of these cubs survived. One of them didn't, but they're amazingly cute to watch. I've been studying wolves recently. That's a big wolf in North America. Well, she was pretty big, and we had a radiocoloring, not sedating and capture exercise, and yeah, it was good fun. Anyway, we have had long-term monitoring through observations, and if you see this tiny little one in 2014, this tiny little cub in 2014 grew to be this feisty lady in 2018. So those are the perks of long-term monitoring. You can see generations of lions growing in front of you, and you can observe and know the triumphs and tragedies of their lives. And as you keep observing them, and that I felt is one of the major. I have been fortunate to be associated with this long-term project, and that's something that's a big boost for a wildlife biologist like me. If you see in most of these pictures, I am with data sheets, observing lions and in close quarters. That's the just the sedated lion. She's just coming out of, just put the transmitter on. And most of the times I'm writing something, scribbling something, because I've been observing them and taking behavioral notes. But most of my data sheets look like this, nothing, zero. It's just because they mostly do this. They're mostly sleeping. Trust me, life of a behavioral biologist is pretty boring, although it seems great to be working with a charismatic carnivore or charismatic species like this, but most of the time, that's about 15, 16 hours a day. That's what they are doing. When they do not, that's when they hunt, and that's when they eat. That's the fun part. But most of the time, it's just resting, and more resting. But anyway, lions in this landscape, you can see just on the in the predictor, you can see them right on the roads where they will proclaim that this is where I am. But you will also get these encounters like this, where you're walking in thickets and you suddenly see this ball of flame right in front with that growl. I'm like, oh, okay, didn't know you were here. But anyway, that's the entire process. I never knew. When I saw my first lions, I never knew that such a big animal could be so well camouflaged. They just disappear in the thickets because everything is rusty, tawny brown in that landscape. But during the monsoon, before the rain, it looks like this: dry, rusty, brown, and just on those 2 or 3 showers, you have the entire landscape turned into emerald green. And I'm like, oh, this is not the forest that I work with. Like overnight, how did that change? But anyway, so yeah. Yeah, so I would be happy to take questions, and that's my email ID, and I would be happy to take any questions from my presentation or anything associated with lions or the kind of work that I do. Thank you.
Thank you, Stotra.
It was a wonderful presentation. I am sure that everyone enjoyed the presentation. And there are some questions from Ritesh. Can you?
Yeah, I'll start with mine. So, Stotra, you mentioned that if it happens that if they transfer the lioness from Gujarat to Madhya Pradesh, so
Right.
do they have, because you mentioned like 60% of them are like scavengers, do they have like livestock like from Gujarat, or what's the prey population, how they can hunt? Because you mentioned like 60%, 65% of them are like scavengers, right? Will they survive if they transfer to Madhya Pradesh?
No. So the thing is, okay, fine. So if the question is, if you're saying that these animals are completely capable of predating,
Yeah.
it's just that when you get free food, who doesn't like free food, right? So they're absolute predators, and they predate and hunt they predate and hunt wild prey. But when you get free food and free buffet, of course they just keep
Okay.
they just they can completely gorge and feed on them.
Sure. And the second one is like the whole lion population is started with the 50 members, right?
Yeah.
Is there any about yeah? So is there any genetic disease reported because of a lot of inbreeding population? Whatever we assume.
Right. So I didn't show that in my presentation, but what we looked at, or what my predecessor, my former colleague of mine who had done long-term studies on the population, he looked at demographic parameters, like how the population is doing per se, because most of the time what inbreeding does is it causes inbreeding depression. And what does depression mean is that the population parameters through which like females go infertile, females do not breed properly, cubs die, recruitment doesn't happen, and things like that. So these are proxies, or these are measures with which you can measure whether the population is doing well or not. According to the long-term data, what we have found is that there is inbreeding, of course, but there is no inbreeding depression as of yet. The inbreeding depression has not hit the population as of yet. That population parameters are still comparable to big outbred populations of lions like in the Serengeti. So there is very high inbreeding in the population, but inbreeding depression has not hit yet. There are some cases which has these problems of which we believe they are congenital or genetic defects. But what happens is these cubs do not survive, or they die off, causing a natural purging of these animals, and they do not get to reproduce or move on or propagate their genes or the bad genes. The deleterious effects of those inbreeding is actually moved out of the population, because naturally through natural selection these animals are weeded out. So yeah.
So I'll read out the questions. This is from Dr. M. Soundarajan. So what will be the best measure to monitor the present situation of tiger population?
Well, I think the tiger population is being monitored pretty well by the NTCA and the Wildlife Institute of India, because every fourth year, once in every 4 years, they come up with a population census, and it shows that the populations are numbers are increasing, although the range has declined. So and the Tiger Reserve and the State Forest Department keep a regular check every year. They do a census every year, whereas in the national scale, it is done once in every 4 years. So I guess the pulse of the population is being collected pretty nicely, and so I guess the tiger population is being monitored in the best scientific way possible.
So the second question is like this happened around 5 to 6 years ago when I added for a trek to place approximately 15-18 kilometers above Ooty. It was a forest reserve. where it was told us that the villagers living there wear a mask behind their head for protection from tigers. Especially in Sundarbans they do, right? But until I have read about cats, they do not attack unless provoked or attack first. So why would the villagers take such precaution earlier if they haven't disturbed the wildlife?
Right. So yeah, what's my general understanding of working with these animals go? Yes, they do not attack without being provoked or without like females with cubs or mating pairs are absolutely a no-no because they are in a different state of their mind and protection, of course. So they do attack, but without provocation, these animals mostly do not attack. They go, they mostly go unnoticed. But there are cases, well, what I have known from places like Sundarban, well, where there is an entire repertoire of behavior where tigers actually kill humans recurrently. There is a culture. I'm recently working on something called animal cultures, and there might human killing or man eating. I don't want to use the word man eating because it's gender biased. I'm saying human killing or fatalities might be in these areas might be a culture that animals actually do not fear people so much, because Sundarbans is a place which, according to my mentor, he says that Sundarbans is the only place in the range of tigers where tigers have never been hunted by people. So actually tigers do not have the fear of people at all. So, and recurrent man-eating can be a possibility. This is just a theory. This is just a hypothesis. But in certain places, yes, villagers and people who live with these carnivores, trust me, they know better, and they take these precautions. But I don't know whether the mask works, because I don't know whether tigers or cats actually cannot differentiate between the two. I have never tried it. I don't want to try it, rather. So I don't want to be in a spot. But so coming back to that question, I think that you should ask the villagers what happened there. But there are cases where unprovoked attacks also happen. But yeah.
So the next question from Dr. Jayaprakash. So why should the Asiatic lions be an exclusive property of Gujarat? Why can't some of them be transferred to provide a survival of the species? I think you have covered it.
I don't think I'm the right person to ask this question. I don't know. I deal with the how question, that how can they be translocated? How can that entire idea can be implemented? That's where people like us or people like people like my mentor, Professor Dalla, comes in, who has been working online for a long time. But our biologists come in. Why? That's a very different question. That's a bureaucratic question you need to ask some other people. I think it's beyond the scope of my understanding or answering completely.
So this next question from Ashwar. What's the update of reintroducing Asiatic cheetah, as Iran refused to provide Asiatic cheetah?
I don't know where it stands, but apparently where it stood is that it was supposed to be moving, but somewhere early this year, it was supposed, the entire project was brought in, conceptualized, but I don't know what's happening because COVID-19 has completely moved the entire ball out of the park for every sense. So I really don't know what's happening with the Asiatic cheetah reintroduction. I think the Wildlife Institute of India is a better organization to ask that question, but I would love to see the cheetah in India.
Okay, the next question from CK: how to reduce the habitat fragmentation by roads, and how the territorial fights among animals make impact on biodiversity?
How to reduce the habitat fragmentation by roads? Good question. I think so. The person who asked that question has worked on fragmentation more than I have. So I feel quite honored that he asked me that question. But anyway, so I think there are two approaches to deal with this. The first thing is that if you can delineate places which are primarily important habitats for movement of animals, and that cannot be touched upon, well, you can divert these roads or have built up in other places, and leave and prioritize these areas to be left as untouched corridors. Or if you have to bring roads maybe thinking about underpasses or overpasses are an important alternative in these areas where you cannot do away with roads. That's one thing. How the territorial fights among animals make impact on biodiversity. I believe that territorial fights within population is a natural phenomena. It happens on its own, but when you have a very small population, even like maybe a tiny population of Isle Royal wolves or a tiny population of maybe tigers before they went extinct in Sariska, that small little population, if you lose animals in a territorial fight, or any stochastic event like a road mortality or a territorial fight, that can cause a huge effect on the entire population.
So the next question,
as a stochastic process in itself. Recently, there was an outbreak when a number of lions died due to some unknown disease. Reason: it's unknown disease. You have already mentioned it's unknown. No, it's not. So the department says that there has been an outbreak of tick-borne babesiosis, but I think the recent report is not out. People are still investigating what actually happened. I have not been there, but people, the center and the state are investigating. They have sent samples, and we are awaiting results. Whenever the reports come out, I'm sure it would be on public media to answer that question. According to the recent census held in Gujarat, the Asiatic lion population has been increased, but experts say the census method has been outdated and the Asiatic lions, which are affected by the CDD disease, has not been documented last 2 years. What do you think about it? Good question. Tough question, difficult question, politically charged question. Yes, well, the approach that the department takes, it's based on, it's a direct count of animals, which we all know that there are fallacies and they can be overestimated or underestimated. And since lions live on a huge landscape where counting every individual is difficult, so I believe that there would be prudence. Of course, there would be prudence in moving to a better, moving to a scientifically robust method of looking at census. The other part of the question is that the effect of CDV disease has not been documented last 2 years. I think there needs to be more investigation in this, because we need to completely understand what's exactly happening. There is CDV, yes, because in 2018 when the outbreak happened, I was part of that team looking into it, and yes, there was presence of CDV, but we do not know what's the extent of effect and how to mitigate it, because mostly that's the other factor, because lions are in close proximity with feral dogs and cats. And I think the forest department has started vaccinating dogs, because that's what they did in the Serengeti. When the CDV outbreak happened, they actually vaccinated all dogs across the entire landscape, because these dogs act as reservoirs. So I hope, and I think the forest department has started doing it. I do not know, but of course there is a room of more investigation and to understand what exactly is causing. If there is a CDV outbreak, why is it happening now? Why not before? What are the paraphernalia or correlates that are causing it to happen right now? There is a lot of questions. There is a lot of how and why questions, and I personally would like to know a few more of those. Is there any step or measure taken to avoid such circumstances in the future? I think you're talking about the death, the CDV, the CDV or the babesiosis. Well, I think when the previous outbreak happened, animals were quarantined in that area. Animals were quarantined, and now what I know from sources is that they have started vaccinating dogs, but there has to be a regular disease surveillance, which I hope has been incorporated in the conservation measures, prioritized conservation measures of Asiatic lions. There has to be a surveillance of disease across the landscape to look at the potential of the disease or potential of any epidemic in the future. I think the best way to deal with this is to understand what's happening and to get ready for it. Will any ecological problems, if when the lions introduced in southern Western Ghats, that would be interesting. Lions in a southern Western Ghats. I don't know if that's an even thought at the moment. I have like southern Western Ghats. First of all, it's a evergreen forest, and you have tigers there. I don't know if what's going to happen if lions. I don't know whether you need to put lions in that area or not, because historically lions were not present in that landscape at all. At least in the recent history, lions were not present in that landscape. It would be better to put lions in landscapes where they were previously present, habitats are similar than geese. But I don't think southern Western Ghats would be a prudent choice. But if you put lions in southern Western Ghats, it would be. I don't. I don't know what happens when you put an absolutely new. Well, the question is whether you need to put lions in southern Western Ghats is a far more pertinent question than what happens when you do. Does your research harm the lions? Right. No, they don't. All we do from our research is to understand and to bring about more information to save them, to conserve them, and most of the time, what we do is just follow them, and they get habituated to us in the sense that they're not attracted to us. They get habituated to us that we are just like pestering flies, that they will always be around, and we keep our distance. We just follow them quietly, and we collect information remotely through telemetry or phone. But yeah, we don't harm animals. The information that we collect are crucial in safeguarding their long-term interest. What can we do when inbreeding depression happens? There will be a mobilization from Africa or what? I don't think that's a prudent choice, because they are different subspecies now. They are different, absolutely different subspecies, and I don't think that we should bring African lions to enhance the genetic stock. What we can do is to have an insurance population or second population somewhere, maybe in Gujarat or maybe outside, and keep them away from any epidemic or any major environmental problem. But I think given what we have at the moment, we need to safeguard the genetic stock that we have. I don't think that we need to bring in, or that if that is at all biologically necessary, to bring in African genetic stock into the Asiatic system. Okay. Like tiger and tourism have a greater boost in this country. Why is the situation not same with the lion, or are they not well promoted when it comes to wildlife? I beg to differ. I totally beg to differ. Lion tourism. Well, if you take the magnitude of entire tourism in tigers are present in how many? 18 states in the country. Lions just one. But if you look at the amount of amount of money that tourism gathers from lions per capita just from one place, it's huge. Gir is one of the highest visited parks in the entire country, and that, when I consider both nationals and foreign tourists. So I don't think that lion tourism is any way less promoted than tiger tourism. It's just that tigers are present all across the country at a huge scale, whereas lions are just in one place. So yeah, it can only have so many people, or have so many tourists. I'll leave it to the panelists to like, do I answer all questions or?
Yeah, the next question is that for tigers and leopard, we have stripes and rosettes. For these animals, even in low light, the camera trap, we can able to record the stripes and rosettes. But for lions, there are no such things to identify. What's my question is, how can we able to record with camera trap for these lions at night?
We don't. That's why we don't do camera trapping for lion population estimation. We actually follow a different technique. We actually search for lions and take, that's the effort. In this case, it's not the trap nights or the time the camera traps are operational. That's the effort in case of when we put camera traps. But in this case, we search for lions, and that kilometers of movement for us to search lions, that's the effort. And we collect whisker patterns of the face profiles and any cuts and ear marks or any permanent body scars. Yes, it does take more time to collect information on lions because you are searching for them, but with a decent amount of mobilization and force, you can do it, because lions, although they don't have such rosettes and stripes, but they are the least elusive of all the cats, so they compensate for that. And so it's sort of, this is the best that we can do, given that's how we fingerprint lions. So camera trapping is not a process with which we individually identify lions. We can have other techniques like the random encounter model through camera traps for lions, but that's a very different thing. We are still trying to operationalize it for other places in Africa. We'll see how that goes.
Sure. So I think rest of the questions are like regarding that city, Grandest outbreak. So you already replied to that most of the questions.
Yeah, I guess
we can conclude the session now. I think one more question, like in the chat box is there. Just one, this is the last question. What is the lifespan of Asiatic lion and African lion? How different they are?
They're not different. They're not different in lifespans or longevity. Females live slightly longer than males because the males fight for territory. So females live about somewhere between 14 to 16 years of age, whereas males are a bit less. But in terms of longevity of the species per se, they are not different between Asiatic or African lions.
Okay, sure. I think, yeah, if whatever questions arise, what I'll do is we'll send you the mail regarding the questions so I can share with the participants. And Subhish, are you there?
Yeah, Stotra, it was a wonderful session, and we are more than thankful to have you here. And definitely, it's very informative, and so many participants left their comment that they really enjoyed the session with the data and facts. So we are getting the facts, everything from the ground itself. So thanks a lot, man, for coming and joining with us.
Sure, anytime. Thanks for having me.
Okay, man.
You have a nice evening, everyone.
Yeah, good morning. Bye. Anyway, have a good day. So, good night
bye.
for other people. Okay,
thank you, Stotra. It was very informative.
Thanks.
Thank you.
For having me.